Chapter 4. The ship jolted violently, knocking everyone out of their seats. My head hit the back of my chair and I fell to the floor, landing with my shoulder to the ground. At first I wasn't hurt, only shaken. Smoke came from somewhere on my right, and a confused mass of voices surged around me as everyone tried to get back to their stations. Above them all, the captain's steely voice rose, trying to keep everyone calm and organized. But before I had time to take any of this in, a searing pain shot through my right knee. It was unlike any pain I'd ever known. Burning, unbearable pain as if my kneecap were red hot. Agony exploded in my leg, causing me to scream and clutch at my knee with both hands. Just seconds after the first pain, another spasm wrenched through my leg and I crumpled, crying with the intense misery. In a second, Gilders was at my side. He laid his hand on my shoulder and tried to talk to me, but I couldn't focus on what he was saying. The doctor's voice, more worried than I'd heard it in a long time, came from my wristcom, breaking through the fog of pain that enshrouded my mind. "Andi? Andi, where are you?" I couldn't answer as another spasm grabbed my knee. Just when I didn't think I could stand the intensity of the pain another second, it died off suddenly, leaving a throbbing heat. Gilders grabbed my wrist and spoke into the comm. "Gerard, something's wrong with her." "Gilders!" the captain's voice rose out of the confusion. "Take the helm!" At the same time, a voice struggled from my wristcom. "I'll be right there." I heard shouting. Crash shouting, the captain shouting back, but the words wouldn't come into focus. With a hurried, soft touch on my shoulder, Gilders stood up and walked away. I opened my eyes and saw the captain yank Crash from the helm and then step back to allow Gilders to work the panel. I closed my eyes again and began crying, still clutching my knee. I didn't dare take my hands away, afraid the pain would come back. I felt like a little child. The commotion around me just sounded like a solid buzz, and I smelled smoke. I was still sobbing when a shaking hand was laid on my head. I looked up into Crash's eyes. They held a mix of anger and fear, and his voice trembled as he asked, "What's wrong?" "Don't let it come back," I whimpered. He stood and bent down to lift me. I was still gripping my knee, and I shut my eyes tight again, but I felt his arms close around me, and then I had a sensation of being carried along. Confused voices kept up the chaos, and after a moment I heard a door slide open, and then a hand was laid on my forehead. "Andi?" I opened my eyes to see the doctor standing there with such a lovingly concerned face it made me want to cry all over again. "Dad, it's my knee," I began. "Dad, He grasped my hand just as everything turned to black. "That's all?" were the first words I heard when I regained consciousness. They seemed far away and somehow vague, but I knew it was the doctor's voice. "And that sent you up here like the devil was at your back?" "That was all I heard from him," Crash's voice. "It was Leek's departure that worried me. I think it's connected somehow." "But what would they want with an old country doctor?" "I don't know, but he said to warn you." There was a silence, and footsteps echoed through the room. I realized I'd been brought back into my quarters and was now laying on my bed. A hand rested on my shoulder. "How is she?" "She seems fine." The doctor's voice held a hint of confusion. "Crash, you—" I opened my eyes and looked up at the two men. "Dad? What happened?" I felt normal now, although there was a slight numbness in my knee. Instead of answering, he asked me an abrupt question. "Andi, did you hit your knee when you fell?" "No, sir. I fell on my shoulder. That knee wasn't anywhere near the floor." I was a little annoyed with myself for not knowing what the problem was. I thought the doctor had taught me everything about medicine and the human body, but my experience on the bridge didn't fit in with any kind of ailment or injury I'd ever heard of. I had studied prosthetic complications, especially kneecap replacements, and I had never heard of anything remotely like this. "I don't know, sweetheart." The doctor's voice was so gentle it almost scared me, and he hadn't called me sweetheart since my 16th birthday. I looked at Crash, who was knitting his brows and chewing on his lower lip. "What was all that about?" He had the audacity to stare at me as if he didn't know what I meant. What was what all about? Your performance on the bridge. He flushed. I've taken the alacrity through that exact cluster a dozen— Starships aren't the same as speeders, Crash. You should have let Guilders alone. Don't tell me what to do. Crash, said the doctor, with firmness definite enough to silence even Crash. Ask Elmira to send down some soup. See you later, Andi. As my cousin turned to leave the room, I called out, I think you could at least apologize. He stopped but didn't turn around. I didn't mean for you to get hurt. I meant to Guilders. Crash stiffened and hurried out. All right, tell me what exactly happened up there. The doctor pulled a chair up next to where I lay. I recounted the whole story, from the greeting between Crash, the captain, and Guilders, to the first appearance of the cluster, to the jolt that had brought on the strange, intense knee pains. The doctor kept quiet throughout, but when I finished, he took my hand in his and said, If it happens again, you have to page me right away. And be sure to tell me immediately if you discover any other symptoms. You have no idea what could have caused this? I asked again. I knew he'd already said he didn't know, but that just didn't seem possible. It was the leg with your implant, right? I nodded. But you've never felt anything there before? Maybe a couple little twinges, but nothing like this. He tilted his head a little to one side. I'm going to look up the symptom, but I've never encountered anything like this out of the blue. I sighed. I hadn't either. But then I wasn't as experienced as a real doctor. I'd just done some nursing and some assistant-level treatments. He let go of my hand. If I find out anything, I promise that you'll be the first to know. Trying to smile, I prepared to get up, but he laid a restraining hand on my shoulder. No, I want you to get some rest. He started to stand, but I found I didn't want him to leave. I rifled my brain for a topic to keep him there. Dad? He paused. Yes? I'm sorry about Dr. Holmes. He smiled sadly, the professionalism melting away into an unusually empathetic attitude. You remember him? Yes, sir. He was a good man. I'm sorry I couldn't keep up with him more in the last few years. How old were you when you started working for him? He considered for an instant, fingering his chin before he answered. 29. Still just a kid. I tried to imagine him at 29, but couldn't get past his gray hair. I imagined a small version of himself showing up at Dr. Holmes's door in sneakers and a t-shirt. I giggled. He frowned at me. What's so funny about being 29? Nothing. I wonder what Dr. Holmes has to do with Crash coming back. He licked his lips and looked at me as if trying to decide something. At last he said, Crash is going to talk to me more later, but apparently he told Crash to warn me.